Hi, I'm Des Asante. Welcome back to lessons.com. In this next video in our 3 Steps to Amazing Home Recordings series that I've put together for you guys, I wanted to dig into the first step. In the last video, if you recall, I gave a nice sort of brief overview of what the 3 core components are that I wanted to discuss with you guys in this series. And in this video, I want to dig into step number 1 in a little greater detail. If you recall, step number 1 referred to having the ability to draw a very clear and distinct line in the dirt that separates the individual sections or segments of your production process, okay? I believe it's very, very important, and it's a step that a lot of people fail to consider or to be aware of. Just the power involved in having a streamlined and logical and strategic workflow that will allow you to get from point A to point B as quick as possible with the fewest number of impedances that hang you up along your path to a great mix, and simply just to get to the fun part faster, which is the creative elements of mixing that that's what we enjoy about it. Okay, in line with this topic of conversation, I believe the very first thing that you need to do when considering this sort of segmentation of your mix process is to make sure that in the beginning you have completely finished capturing all of the performance elements. So all overdubs have been taken care of, all performances have been captured, all the MIDI parts are in the system, the instruments are put away, the musicians have left the building, and now we're left with all of that content inside our DAW on our computer. That's sort of where we as the mix engineer where we begin our process, okay? But there is a little bit more involved in sort of this sort of setup and sort of to really delineate this part of the process from some of the upcoming stages that we're going to discuss as time goes on, okay? So the first thing, make sure you've captured all musical performances and they're all in the system, in the DAW, waiting to be edited and mixed and so forth, okay? The other thing you need to do is to take any MIDI tracks that you might have been working with software instruments, for example, maybe you've recorded some guitars direct and used some digital amp modeling to achieve your tones. Make sure you've taken all of that and converted that into audio files. What you need to do is take those software instrument outputs and export them and bring them back in as audio tracks. And you always want to use the highest bit depth that your system is capable of. Always work at 24-bit unless your system is capable of more. I'm a Cubase user myself, and in Cubase I'm able to work at 32-bit floating point mathematics, and that is very, very high quality. And the idea behind the bit depth is basically to make sure that you have as much dynamic headroom available to you as the system is capable of producing. The difference between a 16-bit file, even though that's what a standard commercial CD operates at, the difference between 16-bit and 24-bit in terms of dynamic range and headroom is dramatic. And when I talk about dynamic range, I mean the headroom that you have to get loud sounds louder without clipping and overloading your tracks, and also the ability to hear the signals fade right to silence. If you were to listen to a 16-bit file very carefully on some good headphones and listen to, say, like a reverb tail fade away, you'd notice that as it gets softer and softer, eventually it just truncates because there's no more bits left available to represent that information as it gets softer and softer. So that's what I mean by that dynamic range. And a high bit depth is going to achieve that for you, okay? The next thing you want to do after you've got all of your performances converted to high bit audio is then you want to organize your screen. Okay, so what I mean by that is simply just spend a few moments to lay everything out in a logical order, what tracks you're going to mix first up at the top, organize them by families. If you've got multiple drum tracks, organize them into one section, maybe color code them if your DAW supports that. Most of them do, so that you can quickly and easily glance at the screen and know exactly what you're working at. If your DAW is capable of creating folder tracks, in Cubase, that's something that I use heavily, is I'll create folder tracks to store those tracks in so I can collapse that folder and get it out of the way. That has nothing nothing to do with signal routing. It's just organizing my screen so I can sort of open, expand, and collapse the various elements that I want to work with at that given moment. So spend a few moments. It's very worth it. Rename the tracks if they don't have logical names to things that are going to help you in the mix to clearly distinguish between them, especially if you've imported somebody else's material and you're going to mix it. Sometimes people, engineers will, have little quirks, and they'll name something like, Joe's part. And I don't know who Joe is. So is it an acoustic guitar? Okay, then relabel it from Joe's part to acoustic guitar, as an example. Okay. So make sure your session is very organized and that you can quickly and easily glance at the screen and know exactly what you're looking at, and that you can manipulate and get at the sections that you want to work with quickly and easily. Okay. And then the other thing we need to do is, once your screen is organized, is then actually set up the analog or the audio signal routing. Okay. So what you're going to want to do is create buses, or groups as they're referred to in Cubase that I like to use, and make sure you send all of the families of instruments, of tracks, to a unified group. So for example, if you've got 8 drum tracks, kick, snare, overheads, etc., then you want to route those all to one fader, to one bus, so that you can manipulate the entire drum mix on one fader. If you want to turn the whole drum kit up or down, or put a little EQ or compression on the entire drum kit, you can do that at that group bus. So you want to set up all of your audio routing. Take all the guitar tracks, send them to a guitar bus. And the other thing that you'll probably end up doing is creating sub buses. So you might have all of your drum mics, for example, going to a drum bus, but then you might have 3 toms: high tom, mid tom, and low tom, or floor tom. And so you might want to be able to manipulate those as one family as well. So what you can do is take those 3 tom groups, send them to a sub bus called toms, and then send that bus to the bus called drums, if that makes sense. It's a little hard to visualize, but I'm sure you'll figure it out quite easily at home. So again, the idea is so that you can have layers of control over various elements in the project. Okay, if I want to turn up the whole drum kit, I've got a drum fader that's got everything on it. If I want to turn up just the toms, I've got a fader that has all 3 tom mics on it. Okay, and you get the sort of logic and rationale behind that, and that's very important. If you've gotten to this point in the organizational process, then you're going to have a very easy time once you dig into the next step, which we're going to talk about in the next video. The other thing that you can do during this stage is to set up any of your standard effects buses. So in most mixes, regardless of the genre, you're going to need some type of sort of short room reverb, some type of long tail reverb to push things further, and we'll talk more about that in the video concerning our depth dimension. And then, you're going to have some type of delay, most likely, so you can add a little bit of ambience and presence to some tracks. So I like to set those up as effects buses that I can then send tracks to later on, have those all pre-configured with the basic sort of default settings that you can tweak later on when you get into it. And that way, when you listen to that snare and you think, okay, I wish it had a little reverb, the reverb's already there. You just got to send the snare to it. Okay. So this is basically where I draw the line, right at the end of this point right here. That's where I draw the line between that first phase of organization and sort of workflow management, and then the next phase, which we're going to talk about in the following video, that concerns the distribution of those elements through the 3 spatial dimensions. Okay, so if you've made it this far, you're ready to mix. And I want you to open up one of your old sessions and just see if you can tweak the session itself so that it's got a streamlined, quick, and smooth workflow. You're going to find that this allows you to get to the good part much faster, and you'll have a much more pleasurable experience mixing your music if you've spent the time up front to organize and to really draw that line. And now we are ready to start our distribution, our mix itself. Okay, we're going to talk in detail about that in the next video, and I will see you then.